I'm not sure what's happening there. Dimitri Van den Berg is not happy. Michael van Gerwen there has just got his left foot encroaching in the encroachment zone.
This is the reason a generation of darts professionals have walked off stage angrier than the scoreline should have made them. For more than 10 years, opponents of Michael van Gerwen have complained about what he does at the oche while they are throwing. The German broadcaster Sport 1 has headlined his behaviour with the word overstep, and no public sanction from the Professional Darts Corporation has ever surfaced for any of it. The trick has a long history, a list of named victims, and a very simple reason it keeps working. To see why it keeps working, you have to start with the rule itself, or rather with the rule that does not quite exist. The oche is the throwing line, and in both PDC and WDF darts, it sits 2 meters 37 from the face of the board, 7 feet 9 1/4 inches in old measurements. Crossing the front edge of it with your lead foot while releasing a dart is forbidden, and that part of the rulebook is unambiguous. What is not clearly written down anywhere is what the player who is not throwing is supposed to be doing while their opponent stands at the line. Open the PDC's published tournament rules and code of conduct, and you will not find a defined phrase called the exclusive zone anywhere on the page. What you'll find instead is a convention, the convention being that the non-throwing player stands behind and to the side of the thrower, out of their peripheral vision, and does not move while darts are in the air. Deliberate distraction is a finable offence, excessive noise is finable, and walking into the throwing area before the opponent has retrieved their darts is finable too. The precise question of how close is too close and how much lean is too much lean gets left almost entirely to referee discretion, and that gap in the rulebook is where the entire MVG controversy lives. Michael van Gerwen, known as Mighty Mike and the Green Machine, is Dutch, born in Boxtel in April 1989. World titles arrived in 2014, 2017 and 2019, 3 of them, and around them piled multiple Premier League crowns, multiple World Match Plays, World Grand Prix wins, a Grand Slam of Darts, a UK Open and a Masters. At 17 years old, back in 2007, he became the youngest player in history to hit a televised 9-darter. From 2014 to 2020, he sat almost permanently at world number 1. By any reasonable measure, he ranks among the 3 or 4 greatest darts players the sport has ever produced, and he ranks among the most physically present players too, which is exactly where this story begins. Complaints about that presence first boiled over on camera in 2017 at the Premier League event in Belfast when Van Gerwen faced Adrian Lewis and the match finished 6-all. The post-match interview burned, and the PDC's own footage from that night carries the title No Love Lost between Michael van Gerwen and Adrian Lewis in Belfast. The two of them traded words about each other's conduct on stage, and while the dispute was framed as general gamesmanship rather than a single named offence, it was the first time a fellow professional had effectively gone on camera and stated on the record that something about how Van Gerwen behaved while you were trying to throw at him was not normal. 5 years later, on the 29th of January 2022, at the Masters in Milton Keynes, the last 16 pitted Van Gerwen against Luke Humphries, and the match went all the way to a deciding leg with MVG winning it 10-9. What followed was an explosion. Humphries, who would later become world champion himself, looked visibly furious at the line, and his accusation was that Van Gerwen had coughed during his throw. Speaking to Livy Darts TV afterwards, MVG responded dismissively, telling them in his own words, he said, "Why did you cough? He was 200 points behind. I just cleared my throat, that's all."
200 points behind, sorry. Yeah, sorry. Only 200.
Strictly speaking, that's a coughing complaint rather than a stepping complaint. But the point fans seized on was the bigger one, that the man chasing an MVG lead is not only chasing the score, he is also chasing the noise, the body, the breath, and the proximity. 3 months after that incident, on the 21st of April 2022, came Premier League Night 11, Belfast once again, the final, with Van Gerwen facing Johnny Clayton. An on-stage incident involving the referee broke out during the match, and the footage of it was preserved on Edgar TV Darts under the title MVG and Referee On Stage Incident during Premier League Final. The reported flashpoint that night was whistling, with one of the players whistling while the other was throwing, the referee getting involved, and once again the conversation around Van Gerwen ending up not about the game itself, but about what he was doing while his opponent was at the line. Which brings us to the moment that, of every clip in the file, sits closest to the heart of this question. The date was the 2nd of January 2023, the venue Alexandra Palace. The match a World Championship semi-final between Michael Van Gerwen and Dimitri Van den Bergh. MVG won that match and walked into the final, where Michael Smith would beat him in what has since become a legendary final in its own right. The semi-final itself was captured by the German rights holder Sport 1 in a clip with a title that translates as "This overstep is causing fireworks in the semi-final." The German word Sport 1 used was Übertritt, meaning an overstepping, a crossing of a line. Sport 1's own description of the clip states in translation that Van den Bergh and Van Gerwen are not competing on level terms in the second semi-final, and that the Belgian is evidently irritated by his opponent's behaviour. That is a major European sports broadcaster on its official channel, framing the storyline of an MVG World Championship semi-final as a crossing of a line, and the framing came not from a fan video, not from a forum thread, but from Sport 1 itself. That clip stands as the single clearest televised case where the language of encroachment has been applied to Van Gerwen by a mainstream broadcaster, and no public sanction followed it.
Jimmy felt that you were encroaching his space slightly. What was your take on that?
I don't really know what his problem was, but you have to concentrate yourself towards your own game, and that's exactly what I did then. Then games can get tense, but you need to focus yourself, and that's exactly what I did then. He probably said I was stamping whatsoever, but he was losing the game, so he had to say something.
All of which leaves a single, unavoidable question hanging over the entire story, the question of why nothing has been done. Generations of opponents have grumbled, a major European broadcaster has used the word overstep, and dedicated darts YouTube channels including Darts Flicks, Darts for Fans, and the Bull Files have spent years cataloguing the lean and the closeness and the presence. Part of the answer is structural. Player discipline is not handled by the PDC directly, but instead sits with an independent body called the Darts Regulation Authority, or the DRA. On-stage referees can issue verbal warnings during a match. Tournament directors and referees can submit reports afterwards, and the DRA then decides on fines, suspensions, or bans, with major decisions published on the PDC's website. The DRA has proven it can issue real punishments for gamesmanship, with Gerwen Price famously fined after his clashes with Gary Anderson around the 2018 Grand Slam final, the canonical example of the system working. The mechanism, in other words, is willing to punish on-stage conduct when it decides to. The other part of the answer is the rulebook itself. With no defined exclusive zone measured in feet or centimetres, with the rule about non-thrower positioning written as a convention rather than a hard line, a referee in real time has nothing precise to point at. They cannot say you crossed marker X, they can only claim they felt something was distracting. Once you reach World Championship semi-final level against a 3-time champion in front of a live broadcast audience, the threshold for that kind of intervention becomes enormous. The result is a behaviour that exists in the grey area between custom and law, and grey areas reward the player willing to live inside them. The case for the defence deserves to be heard here, and it is not a weak case. Van Gerwen's natural body language is leaning, animated and forward set, and Sky Sports commentators, including Wayne Mardle, have for years described him on broadcast as a physically present player whose intensity is part of his game. Many great players have historically stood relatively close behind the thrower, Phil Taylor included, and the convention varies from one player to the next. MVG himself has consistently rejected the gamesmanship framing in his post-match interviews, including that response to Humphreys at the Masters, where his framing positioned the complaint as coming from a player already 200 points behind. His strongest defenders then point at the very thing the critics complain about, the fact that across more than 10 years at the top of professional darts, no PDC sanction for oche encroachment against him has been publicly issued. If it were really illegal, runs the argument, somebody by now would have made it illegal. The case for the prosecution rests on a different kind of evidence, and that evidence is the pattern. It runs from Adrian Lewis in 2017, through Luke Humphreys at the start of 2022, through Johnny Clayton 3 months later, and into Dimitri Van den Bergh and the Sport 1 Übertritt. Headline at the start of 2023, The complaints come not from journeymen, but from players who have themselves won or contended for world titles, and behind all of it sits a comparison the darts world already knows by heart. At the 2018 World Match Play semi-final, Gary Anderson visibly objected to Mensah Suljović's pace and movement around the oche, walked off and told Sky Sports, in a line that has been replayed ever since, "If that's darts, then I'm off." Wayne Mardle criticised Anderson on air. Anderson later called him a numpty in response, and the entire sport had to spend a fortnight arguing about player movement at the line. That argument has never really gone away, and the MVG file is, in many ways, the same argument running quietly underneath the careers of every opponent he has faced. As of the most recent World Championships, no new PDC rule has been publicly introduced to define the space around the oche while an opponent is throwing. The era's headlines have moved on to Luke Littler and Luke Humphreys, and Van Gerwen's recent campaigns have centred on reclaiming ranking ground rather than chasing fresh controversy. On slow motion fan footage, the behaviour itself looks much the same as it did 5 years ago. The trick, if it really is a trick, is not exactly a trick at all. It is the use of a gap in a rules book, the willingness to live in a grey area that less confrontational players will not enter. The act of leaning, breathing and existing fractionally closer to the line than the convention assumes inside a sport where the convention is doing most of the policing. For 10 years, opponents have noticed it, commentators have hinted at it. Germany's Sport 1 has used the word overstep, and across that same 10 years, Michael van Gerwen has walked back to his stool 3 world titles deep, with no fine, no suspension, and no rule change to show for any of it. That is the trick nobody has stopped, and the reason nobody has stopped it is not that nobody has seen it, but that nobody has yet written down exactly what it is.